So our next object or feature we're going to work with is the hatch pattern. So a hatch pattern will fill in an area with a either a shading or a particular pattern of lines. So you'll see hatch patterns being, maybe a crossing segment or uh, basically a series of triangles and dots representing concrete or some other kind of heavy duty asphalt area maybe. So if you've isolated and frozen the layers, let's show you how to unisolate and thaw everything. So, or unlock everything. So the first thing we'll do is unlock. So if you go over to the layers window and you click on the lock layer here and click unlock, you'll see the command line asks you to select a layer by selecting the object. So I'll just click that object and you can see now it's brighter. That means it's unlocked. And when you select an object, you can see now we get the grips, which lets us edit it. To unisolate everything, we'll select the icon next to that, which says isolate. And instead of picking isolate layer, we'll pick unisolate layer and it turns everything back on. So if we take a look in these areas here, you can see this is a hatch pattern. You can see it kind of represents concrete. This is also a hatch pattern where it's kind of just more of a checkerboard. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select that hatch pattern and we'll go ahead and delete it. And we'll go over to the toolbar here and we'll click on hatch. And when you do that, it opens up the hatch pattern over here. So you'll see this gives you a preview of what the pattern will look like. And down here is the all the different patterns that are available. So you could do like this pattern, or if I use uh, my down arrow here, or just drop down here, this down arrow here, and just start picking through those. If you roll your wheel, you'll see it goes down to show you some angles and scale. So there's some different settings that you can use. And this is one of those things where you really got to play with the settings depending on the scale of your drawing and what you're trying to represent. So it's kind of hard to show in just a short video, but once we show you kind of the workflow, you'll be able to go in here and play around and use some of these different pattern uh, uh, configurations and settings. So the pattern is one thing, but then there's also this fill option. So with fill, you can start doing gradient fill. So if you wanted to show, a green area or a blue area or a white or red area, you can use one color or two colors and create like the gradients. And then you have some other settings over here that kind of control how that hatch pattern is connected to the boundary, all right, and what placement it happens. So we're just going to stick with a hatch for right now, and I'm going to change that pattern to a concrete pattern. So if you go down and pick AR concrete, then we want to choose how we want to fill it in. So if we pick on this select entities or specify entities, it takes us back to our drawing workspace. And if I pick on that line right there, it's asking me to either, do an internal point or select boundary entity. So if you do I for internal and pick that, you'll see that it's kind of finds the internal shape, right? Because it's not just picking that line, it's actually picking and following the kind of the shapes of and again, these two boxes, intersect. And that's part of the settings that you can mess with. So if I press enter, it comes over here and you can see now I've got this checkbox. So when I click the checkbox, you'll see that it applies that hatch pattern. And you can see it only applied it within, this area. So if I select that and delete it, let's try that again where we do the hatch pattern and I pick on the entities, and let's just pick this versus doing the internal. So when I right click and press enter, you'll see when I press that checkbox, now it fills in everything, right? So a little bit different, mechanism of how it where the boundary is. So the boundary is this object, and you'll see that if I stretch that, the hatch pattern moves with it. All right. If I pick that object again and delete it, now let's do the hatch pattern. And if we were to do a fill pattern, again, selecting that object and I pick that boundary line, right click and press enter, and then click the plus, you'll see that it fills it in as that shaded pattern for us. I'm going to control Z to undo. So that's the hatch pattern. A lot of different settings you can do. If you do the specified points now, what I can do is, let's say that maybe this area over here was light duty asphalt. Well, I could come in here and just start picking. Well, it says internal point, uh, deselect boundary, or entity. So if I pick E for entities, it has to be a closed, basically a closed object. So if I was to come in, try to find one that made some shapes here, basically some boundary area. So those are dimensions, so they're not going to work. But let's say we pick that line right there. Let's see if right click and enter and to check, you can see that it actually picked up that entire object. So you're able to kind of pick with the points of where you want the hatch pattern to be.